When I discovered the forged power of attorney documents hidden in my daughter's home office, and realized they'd been planning to have me declared incompetent so they could control my $800,000 estate, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. Within 6 months, my daughter and son-in-law had lost their house, their reputations, and any claim to my inheritance, while I was living my best life in a beautiful retirement community 2,000 miles away, surrounded by people who actually valued my presence. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever been made to feel like a burden by people who were supposed to love you, only to discover they had ulterior motives for keeping you around? Share your story below, because today you're going to learn that sometimes the family members who think you're helpless and disposable are about to discover they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. This story is about the morning when I realized that my own daughter, the child I'd raised, supported through college, helped through her divorce, and welcomed into my home during her time of need, had been systematically planning to steal my independence, my assets, and my dignity while convincing me it was all for my own good. When I discovered that the daughter I'd sacrificed for, invested in, and trusted with my most vulnerable moments had been quietly positioning herself to inherit my assets while I was still very much alive and capable. My name is Margaret Rose Sullivan, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd found the perfect living arrangement in the charming guest cottage behind my daughter Jessica's beautiful colonial home in Westchester County, New York. For 3 years, this setup had seemed like the ideal solution for a widow navigating the challenges of aging while maintaining her independence. I had my own space, a renovated 800-square-foot cottage with original hardwood floors, a gourmet kitchen, and French doors opening onto a private garden that bloomed with the heirloom roses I'd been cultivating for 40 years. More importantly, I was close enough to my family to be useful without being intrusive, available to help with my teenage grandsons Tyler and Brandon whenever Jessica and her husband Derek needed support, yet independent enough to maintain my own routines, friendships, and sense of autonomy. What I didn't know was that the daughter I'd been helping financially for decades had been quietly working to ensure that independence would end the moment I became inconvenient to her long-term financial plans. The cottage had become my sanctuary. After my husband, William Patrick Sullivan, died 4 years ago from complications following a massive stroke that had taken him at 74, just 3 months after we'd finally paid off our mortgage and were planning to spend our golden years traveling to the places we'd dreamed of visiting throughout our 48 years of marriage. William and I had built our life together through careful planning, hard work, and the kind of shared values that had sustained us through every challenge we'd faced. William had spent 36 years as a senior accountant at IBM's White Plains facility, working his way up from entry-level bookkeeper to department supervisor through pure dedication and an exceptional talent for financial analysis. He'd been the kind of employee that companies build their reputation on: reliable, honest, meticulous, and completely committed to doing excellent work regardless of whether anyone was watching. His colleagues had trusted him with their most complex projects, and his supervisors had relied on his judgment for decisions that affected millions of dollars in corporate assets. I had built my own career as a high school English teacher at Bronxville High School, where I'd spent 32 years helping teenagers discover the power of literature, develop their writing skills, and learn to think critically about the world around them. Teaching had been more than just a job for me. It had been a calling that had allowed me to influence hundreds of young minds while developing skills in communication, psychology, and conflict resolution that would serve me well in ways I could never have anticipated. Together, William and I had earned a comfortable middle-class income that we'd managed with the kind of financial discipline that had allowed us to build substantial wealth over time. We'd lived below our means throughout our careers, investing consistently in our retirement accounts, purchasing life insurance policies that would protect the surviving spouse, and building an emergency fund that had provided security during uncertain economic times. Our approach to money had been conservative but strategic. William's expertise in corporate finance had taught him to identify solid investment opportunities, while my teacher's pension had provided a stable foundation for our retirement planning. We'd purchased our home in Scarsdale in 1987 for $245,000, when the neighborhood was still affordable for middle-class families, and we'd watched its value appreciate to nearly $950,000 by the time I'd needed to sell it after William's death. More importantly, we'd approached our marriage as a true partnership, making all major decisions together and supporting each other's individual goals while working toward shared objectives. William had encouraged my pursuit of a master's degree in education, which had increased my earning potential and job satisfaction. I had supported his decision to take on additional responsibilities at IBM, even when it meant longer hours and more work-related stress. Jessica Marie Sullivan had been our only child, born in 1975 after 3 years of trying to conceive and several heartbreaking miscarriages that had tested our faith and strengthened our appreciation for the family we were eventually able to create. From the moment she'd taken her first breath, Jessica had been the center of our universe. A bright, curious, determined little girl who'd approached everything in life with the kind of intensity that had both delighted and occasionally exhausted us. Even as a young child, Jessica had displayed the intelligence and ambition that would characterize her entire approach to life. She'd been reading by age 4, had mastered complex math concepts years ahead of her peers, and had shown an early aptitude for leadership that had made her a natural choice for student government positions throughout her academic career. Teachers had consistently praised her work ethic, her analytical thinking, and her ability to organize and motivate other students. But Jessica's greatest strength had also been her greatest challenge. Her drive for excellence and control had sometimes made her impatient with people who didn't share her urgency or meet her standards. As early as elementary school, I'd noticed that Jessica could be dismissive of classmates she considered slow or unmotivated, and she'd occasionally expressed frustration with teachers who didn't challenge her sufficiently. "Mom," she'd said during middle school after a particularly frustrating day with a substitute teacher, "some people just don't understand how to be efficient. It's like they enjoy wasting time and making everything more complicated than it needs to be." At the time, I'd attributed these comments to normal adolescent impatience and had worked with Jessica to develop empathy for people with different learning styles and capabilities. But looking back now, I can see that these early patterns had revealed aspects of Jessica's character that would eventually create the conditions for her ultimate betrayal. Throughout high school, Jessica had excelled academically while building an impressive resume of extracurricular activities that had positioned her for admission to top universities. She'd been valedictorian of her graduating class, editor of the school newspaper, captain of the debate team, and president of the National Honor Society. Her college application essay had been about the importance of family values and the role that her parents' example had played in shaping her commitment to integrity and service. "My parents have taught me that real success comes from hard work, honest dealing, and caring for the people who matter most in your life," she'd written. "They've shown me that a life well lived is measured not by personal achievements alone, but by the positive impact you have on your family and community." I'd been so proud of that essay, so convinced that William and I had succeeded in raising a daughter who understood and embraced the values that had guided our own lives. Jessica had been accepted to NYU's business school with a substantial merit scholarship, and we'd eagerly provided the additional financial support needed to make her education possible. Jessica's college years had been marked by the same academic excellence that had characterized her high school career. She'd maintained a 3.9 GPA throughout her 4 years, had been active in business honor societies and leadership organizations, and had completed internships with prestigious Manhattan firms that had given her practical experience in corporate finance and marketing strategy. William and I had been incredibly proud of Jessica's achievements, but we'd also been acutely aware of the financial sacrifices required to support her education at one of the country's most expensive universities. Even with her merit scholarship, the remaining tuition, room and board, and living expenses had totaled nearly $25,000 per year. A substantial commitment that had required us to delay some of our own goals, including the kitchen renovation we'd been planning and the European vacation we'd been dreaming about for years. But we'd made these sacrifices gladly, both of us convinced that investing in Jessica's education was the most meaningful way we could use our resources to ensure her future success and happiness. Jessica had seemed genuinely grateful for our support, often expressing appreciation for the opportunities we were making possible and promising that she would find ways to honor our investment once she'd established herself professionally. "Dad, Mom," she'd said during her graduation ceremony, her voice emotional as she'd addressed us from the podium. "Everything I've accomplished is because you believed in me and were willing to sacrifice for my dreams. I promise you that I'll spend my career making you proud and finding ways to give back to others the way you've given to me." After graduation, Jessica had quickly landed a position with Meridian Marketing Group, a mid-sized firm that specialized in developing advertising campaigns for financial services companies. Her starting salary had been $65,000, excellent for a new graduate. And she'd thrown herself into her work with the same intensity that had characterized her academic pursuits. Within 2 years, Jessica had been promoted to account manager, with responsibility for managing relationships with several major clients and overseeing junior staff members. Her supervisors had consistently praised her analytical skills, her attention to detail, and her ability to develop creative solutions to complex marketing challenges. Jessica has the kind of strategic thinking and client management skills that make her invaluable to our organization, her supervisor had written in a performance review that Jessica had proudly shared with us. She consistently exceeds expectations and demonstrates the leadership potential that will make her a senior executive in this industry. By her 5th year with the company, Jessica had been earning over $90,000 annually and had been recognized as one of the firm's rising stars. She'd been featured in industry publications, had spoken at marketing conferences, and had been recruited by larger firms offering even more lucrative opportunities. It was during this period of professional success that Jessica had met Derek, Jonathan Morrison, a corporate attorney who specialized in mergers and acquisitions for a prestigious Manhattan law firm. Derek had been 31 when they'd met, 3 years older than Jessica, with the kind of polished confidence and professional credentials that had immediately impressed her. Derek's background had been remarkably similar to Jessica's: upper middle class, family, excellent education, early career success, and clear ambitions for continued advancement in his chosen field. He'd graduated from Columbia Law School, had clerked for a federal judge, and had joined Morrison, Klein & Associates as an associate attorney with a starting salary that had already exceeded Jessica's income despite her 5 years of professional experience. "Mom, Derek is exactly the kind of partner I've been hoping to find," Jessica had told me during one of our regular phone conversations. "He's intelligent, ambitious, successful, and he shares my values about building a stable, prosperous life together." William and I had been pleased with Jessica's choice, both of us impressed by Derek's respectful manner, his obvious affection for Jessica, and his genuine interest in becoming part of our family. Derek had made efforts to connect with William over their shared interest in financial planning and investment strategy, and he'd often complimented me on the home I'd created and the values I'd instilled in Jessica. "Mrs. Sullivan," Derek had said during one of their early visits to our home, "Jessica talks constantly about the example you and Mr. Sullivan have set for her. She credits you with teaching her everything important about integrity, hard work, and family loyalty." Their wedding in September 2001 had been everything Jessica had dreamed of. An elegant ceremony at the Westchester Country Club, attended by 180 guests, with every detail reflecting the sophisticated taste and high standards that characterized Jessica's approach to all aspects of her life. William and I had contributed $40,000 toward the wedding expenses, money we'd been happy to spend to ensure Jessica's special day was perfect. The wedding had been beautiful, but it had also been expensive in ways that had surprised us. Jessica. And Derek had chosen vendors, venues, and services that had reflected their aspirations rather than their current financial reality. And they'd seemed to assume that family contributions would bridge the gap between their desires and their budget. "Mom, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event," Jessica had said when I'd expressed some concern about the escalating costs. "Derek and I want everything to be perfect, and we're willing to invest in creating memories that will last forever." At the Yahtzee time, I'd attributed the expensive choices to normal wedding enthusiasm and had been pleased that Jessica felt confident enough in her future earning potential to make ambitious plans for her celebration. What I hadn't fully appreciated was that this wedding had established a pattern of lifestyle expectations that would consistently exceed Jessica and Derek's ability to fund through their own efforts alone. The first few years of Jessica and Derek's marriage had been marked by continued professional success for both of them, but also by lifestyle choices that had required increasing levels of debt to sustain. They'd purchased a $750,000 home in Westchester County that had stretched their budget even with their combined six-figure incomes, had taken expensive vacations to Europe and the Caribbean, and had furnished their home with the kind of high-end items that reflected their aspirations for social status and material success. When Tyler had been born in 2003, Jessica had decided to take a leave of absence from her marketing career to focus on motherhood, a choice that William and I had supported, but that had created immediate financial stress for their household. Derek's income alone had been insufficient to maintain their lifestyle while also covering the mortgage, car payments, and other fixed expenses they'd accumulated. "Mom," Jessica had said during a phone conversation when Tyler was 6 months old, "Derek and I are struggling a bit financially with just one income. We were wondering if you and Dad might be able to help us with some temporary support until I can go back to work." William and I had been sympathetic to their situation and had agreed to provide $15,000 to help them manage their immediate cash flow challenges. We'd viewed this assistance as a natural extension of our parental support, similar to the way we'd helped Jessica with college expenses, and we'd assumed it would be a one-time contribution that would bridge them through a temporary difficult period. But the temporary assistance had become a pattern that had continued throughout Tyler's early childhood and had expanded when Brandon had been born 2 years later. Jessica had extended her leave of absence, citing the importance of being present for her children's developmental years, and Derek's income had remained insufficient to maintain their lifestyle without regular family support. "We really appreciate everything you and Dad are doing for us," Jessica had said during one of these conversations. "Having your support gives us the security to make decisions based on what's best for the family, rather than just financial pressure." Over the 5 years of Jessica's extended maternity leave, William and I had provided approximately $75,000 in direct financial support, plus additional assistance with childcare, clothing, and household expenses, when Jessica and Derek had visited us for holidays and vacations. We'd also established education savings accounts for Tyler and Brandon, contributing $500 per month to ensure our grandsons would have the same educational opportunities that Jessica had enjoyed. When Jessica had finally returned to work part-time, when Brandon started kindergarten, she'd seemed to have developed a renewed appreciation for family relationships and the importance of maintaining close connections across generations. She'd begun visiting us more frequently, often bringing the boys for weekend stays that had enriched all our lives and had given William and me the grandparent experience we'd treasured. "Mom, I've realized how much I value having you and Dad so close," Jessica had said during one of these visits. "The boys love spending time with you, and I love knowing that they're learning family values from the people who taught me everything important about life." It had been during this period of renewed closeness that William had suffered his stroke, a medical emergency that had tested our family's strength and had ultimately brought us even closer together. Jessica had been incredibly supportive throughout William's illness, visiting the hospital daily, helping me navigate complex medical decisions, and providing emotional support during the most difficult period of my life. When William had died, Jessica had handled all the practical arrangements, while I'd been too devastated to function. She'd organized the funeral service, had managed communications with family and friends, had dealt with insurance companies and lawyers, and had been my primary source of support during those first awful months of learning to live without the partner who'd defined my adult life. "Mom," Jessica had said as we'd sat in my kitchen after the funeral, surrounded by sympathy cards and casserole dishes from neighbors, "I want you to know that you don't have to face this alone. Derek and I are here for you, and we're going to make sure you have everything you need to rebuild your life." Her support had meant everything to me during those dark months when grief had made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. Jessica had helped me understand my financial situation, had assisted with paperwork and legal matters, and had been instrumental in helping me make decisions about my future living arrangements. 6 months after William's death, when the big house had begun to feel like a mausoleum filled with memories I wasn't ready to confront daily, Jessica had suggested the cottage arrangement that had seemed like the perfect solution for everyone involved. "Mom, you shouldn't be rattling around in that big house all by yourself," she'd said, her voice filled with genuine concern. "Why don't you sell the house and move into the cottage behind our place? You'd have complete independence and privacy, but we'd be right there if you needed anything. Plus, Tyler and Brandon would love having Grandma so close by." The cottage had been beautifully renovated, with gleaming hardwood floors, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and enough space for my favorite furniture and personal belongings. The private garden had been established with mature plantings that had reminded me of the English countryside, and the location had provided easy access to the cultural activities and social connections that had enriched my retirement years. "You could sell the house and invest the proceeds," Jessica had continued, "and use the investment income to cover your living expenses while preserving the principal for your future security. It would be like having your own apartment, but with family nearby and no worries about property maintenance or safety." The financial terms of the cottage arrangement had been generous and had seemed to benefit everyone involved. I'd sold our Scarsdale house for $950,000 and had used $200,000 of the proceeds to pay off Jessica and Derek's remaining mortgage as my contribution to the household expenses and my investment in the property improvements that had made the cottage so comfortable. The remaining $750,000 had been invested in a diversified portfolio managed by Steinberg Financial Advisors, a reputable firm that William and I had worked with for over a decade. The portfolio had been designed to generate approximately $35,000 annually in dividends and interest while preserving the principal for long-term growth, providing me with more than enough income to cover my modest living expenses while maintaining my financial independence. "Margaret, this arrangement gives you the best of both worlds," Derek had said as we'd finalized the legal paperwork. "You have your own space and complete autonomy, but you also have family support and shared resources that make everything more efficient and secure." The cottage rental had been set at $200 per month, well below market rate for a comparable property, reflecting the family relationship and my substantial contribution to paying off their mortgage. The arrangement had also included shared utilities, landscaping services, and household maintenance, making my monthly expenses predictable and manageable on my investment income. For 3 years, this arrangement had worked beautifully from my perspective. I'd enjoyed being close to Tyler and Brandon, helping with homework, attending their soccer games and school events, and providing the kind of grandmotherly support that had enriched all our lives. I'd maintained my independence while feeling secure and connected to family, and I'd assumed that Jessica and Derek had been equally satisfied with our mutually beneficial arrangement. But that Tuesday morning in October, when I'd planned to surprise the family with homemade blueberry muffins using the recipe that had been Tyler's favorite since childhood, everything I'd believed about our relationship had been shattered in the space of a single overheard conversation. I'd awakened early, made my coffee in the French press that had been my morning ritual for years, and had decided to walk the 50 yards from my cottage to the main house to start baking before the family woke up. The morning had been beautiful, One of those perfect autumn days in Westchester when the maple trees were beginning to turn crimson and gold, and the air carried just enough crispness to remind you that the seasons were changing. As I'd approached the kitchen door, I'd heard Jessica's voice carrying clearly through the window she'd opened to let in the fresh morning air. She'd been speaking in the frustrated, impatient tone I'd occasionally heard her use when discussing work problems or household management issues, but I'd never heard her use this tone when speaking about me. "Mom's becoming such a burden," Jessica was saying to Derek, who was apparently having coffee before leaving for his commute to Manhattan. "She's getting more confused, more dependent, and honestly, I'm tired of having to check on her constantly. We need to figure out what to do with her before she becomes a real liability." The words had hit me like a physical blow, stopping me frozen in place just outside the kitchen where I could hear every word but couldn't be seen by the speakers inside. "What kind of timeline are you thinking?" Derek had replied, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first time they'd discussed my problem. "I've been researching memory care facilities upstate," Jessica had continued. "There are some decent places about an hour north of here, not too expensive once we have control of her portfolio. Dr. Harrison thinks we can probably get the cognitive assessment we need to justify the placement." Dr. Harrison was my primary care physician, someone I'd trusted for 15 years and who'd never expressed any concerns about my mental capacity during our regular appointments. The suggestion that he would participate in having me declared incompetent had been almost as shocking as Jessica's casual discussion of disposing of me. "And the financial arrangements?" Derek had asked. "The power of attorney documents are already prepared," Jessica had replied. "Once she's in supervised care, we can manage the investments properly. Steinberg is way too conservative. I can get much better returns with the contacts I have from my marketing days. Plus, we'll save money on her housing costs, and the boys' college expenses are coming up fast." I'd continued listening in horrified fascination as my daughter and son-in-law had discussed my future as if I were a piece of property to be managed rather than a human being with rights, preferences, and the cognitive capacity to make my own decisions about my life. That overheard conversation had revealed not just their intention to have me committed to institutional care against my will, but their systematic planning to gain control of my substantial assets for their own benefit. They'd apparently been preparing legal documents, consulting with medical professionals, and researching facilities without my knowledge or consent, all while maintaining the pretense of caring family members who were concerned about my welfare. But what Jessica and Derek hadn't understood was that their confused dependent burden was actually a retired English teacher who'd spent 3 decades analyzing complex texts, identifying hidden meanings, and teaching critical thinking skills to teenagers who thought they could manipulate adults who weren't paying attention. That morning, as I'd quietly backed away from their kitchen and returned to my cottage, I'd begun planning a response that would demonstrate exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who's spent her entire career dealing with people who think they're smarter than everyone else in the room. Sometimes the family members who think you're becoming a burden are actually revealing that they've become a burden on your right to live with dignity, respect, and autonomy. Jessica and Derek were about to learn that the woman they'd dismissed as a confused liability was actually someone with the intelligence, resources, and determination to ensure they never underestimated anyone like me ever again. The investigation that followed would expose 20 years of financial manipulation, systematic deception, and betrayal so complete that it would destroy everything they'd built while teaching them that some people fight back with consequences they never saw coming. Standing in my cottage that October morning, still reeling from the conversation I'd overheard between Jessica and Derek, I realized I needed to understand exactly how I'd reached this moment of complete betrayal. But to comprehend the full scope of what was happening to me, you need to know about the life I'd built before Jessica decided to destroy it. A life of careful planning, dedicated service, and the kind of financial wisdom that had made her systematic theft possible. My journey to that devastating Tuesday morning had begun 52 years earlier, When I'd graduated from Manhattanville College with a degree in English literature and a burning desire to make a difference in young people's lives. It was 1971, and the teaching profession was experiencing unprecedented changes as schools across the country began implementing new educational philosophies and struggling to address the social upheavals that were transforming American society. My first teaching position had been at Bronxville High School, a prestigious public school in one of Westchester County's most affluent communities, where the expectations for academic excellence were matched only by the pressure on teachers to prepare students for admission to the country's most competitive universities. The school was housed in a beautiful Georgian Revival building that had been constructed in the 1920s, with high ceilings, large windows, and the kind of solid architecture that suggested education was meant to be permanent and transformative. I'd been assigned to teach sophomore and junior English classes, a challenging assignment that required me to help 15 and 16-year-olds develop the analytical thinking and communication skills they'd need for success in advanced placement courses and eventual college admission. These students were bright, motivated, and accustomed to high achievement, but they were also products of privilege who sometimes struggled to understand perspectives different from their own comfortable suburban experience. My starting salary had been $7,800 per year, which sounds impossibly modest now, but had been sufficient to rent a small apartment in nearby Mount Vernon, purchase a reliable used Honda Civic, and begin building the foundation of financial independence that would sustain me throughout my career. From that very first paycheck, I'd committed to saving 15% of my income and investing an additional 10% in the teacher's retirement system, habits that had been instilled in me by my Depression-era parents who'd taught me that financial security came from living below your means and planning for the future. Those early years of teaching had been both exhausting and exhilarating as I'd worked to develop my own educational philosophy and teaching methods. I'd typically arrived at school by 7:30 a.m. to prepare for the day, stayed until 5:30 p.m. for grading and lesson planning, and spent most of my weekends creating educational materials, attending professional development workshops, or reading the latest research on adolescent learning and literacy development. But I'd loved every challenging minute of it. The moment when a struggling student finally grasped the deeper meaning of a complex poem, the excitement of a classroom, full of teenagers discovering the relevance of Shakespeare to their own lives, the satisfaction of watching shy students develop confidence through successful oral presentations, and the pride of seeing former students return years later to thank me for helping them develop skills that had served them well in college and beyond. My teaching approach had been built on the foundation that every student had something valuable to contribute to our classroom community, but that contribution required them to think critically, communicate clearly, and support their ideas with evidence from the texts we studied. I'd refused to accept lazy thinking or superficial analysis, consistently pushing my students to dig deeper, question assumptions, and develop the intellectual courage to defend unpopular but well-reasoned positions. Mrs. Sullivan, students, would often say during particularly challenging discussions, "You never let us get away with anything. You make us actually think about what we're saying." "That's exactly right," I would reply. "My job isn't to make you comfortable, it's to make you capable. The world is going to expect you to think critically and communicate effectively, and I'm going to make sure you're prepared for that challenge." This philosophy had extended beyond academic content to include lessons about personal responsibility, intellectual integrity, and the importance of treating others with respect, regardless of their background or abilities. I'd discovered that teenagers responded positively to high expectations when those expectations were combined with genuine care and consistent support. By my 5th year at Bronxville High School, I'd been recognized as one of the school's most innovative and effective educators. My students consistently scored above district averages on standardized tests, earned high marks on advanced placement examinations, and reported feeling well prepared for the writing demands of college coursework. But more importantly, They'd developed a love of literature and an appreciation for the power of language that had enriched their lives far beyond their academic achievements. I'd also begun mentoring new teachers, sharing the classroom management, techniques and instructional strategies I'd developed through trial and error during my first few years in the profession. The school administration had frequently asked me to serve on curriculum committees, lead professional development workshops, and represent the district at state and national education conferences. Margaret has the rare combination of subject matter expertise, pedagogical skill, and genuine care for students that makes her invaluable to our educational community, my principal had written in a performance evaluation that had led to my first promotion to department coordinator. She consistently demonstrates the kind of professional excellence that defines what teaching can be at its best. During this period, I'd also been pursuing continuing education to stay current with new developments in educational theory and practice. I'd completed a master's degree in English education through evening and summer programs at Teachers College. Columbia University had attended numerous workshops on adolescent psychology and learning differences, and had become certified in advanced placement instruction that had qualified me to teach the school's most academically demanding courses. The additional qualifications had led to increased responsibilities and salary improvements, but more importantly, they'd enhanced my effectiveness as an educator and had given me the tools to help an even wider range of students succeed. By the mid-1970s, I'd been earning $15,000 annually and had been promoted to English department chair, with responsibility for curriculum development, teacher supervision, and budget management across 6 different course levels. It was during my 7th year at Bronxville that I'd met William Patrick Sullivan, the IBM accountant who would become my husband, my best friend, and my partner in building the kind of life that had provided security and meaning for nearly 5 decades. William had been 31 when we'd met, 2 years older than me, with the kind of quiet competence and gentle humor that had made me feel instantly comfortable and appreciated in his presence. We'd met at a community education workshop on personal financial planning that had been offered through the Westchester County Library System. I'd attended because I'd wanted to learn more about investment strategies and retirement planning, while William had been there as one of the volunteer instructors, sharing his expertise in corporate finance and tax preparation. "You're asking exactly the right questions," William had said after I'd participated in a discussion about long-term investment strategies for public employees. "Most people your age aren't thinking seriously about retirement planning, but you clearly understand the importance of starting early and being consistent." "My parents lived through the Depression," I'd replied. "They taught me that financial security doesn't come from hoping for the best. It comes from planning for the worst and working systematically toward your goals." William had smiled at that, a warm expression that had reached his eyes and made me realize how attractive he was when he wasn't concentrating on complex financial calculations. "That's exactly the attitude that leads to long-term success," he'd said. "Would you like to continue this conversation over dinner? I'd enjoy talking with someone who takes financial planning as seriously as I do." Our first date had been at a modest Italian restaurant in White Plains, where we'd spent 3 hours talking about everything from investment philosophy to career goals, from family background to shared interests in history, classical music, and travel. William had grown up in a working-class Irish Catholic family in the Bronx, had served 2 years in the Army after high school, and had used the GI Bill to earn his accounting degree from St. John's University while working part-time to support himself. "I've always believed that education and hard work can overcome almost any disadvantage," he'd told me during that first dinner. "My parents didn't have much money, but they taught me the value of honesty, persistence, and taking responsibility for your own success." By our third date, I'd known that William was someone I could build a life with, a man who shared my values about integrity, responsibility, and the importance of planning for the future, but who also had the sense of humor and emotional intelligence. That would make him a loving partner and eventually a devoted father. William and I had married in June 1973, a simple but elegant ceremony at St. Joseph's Church in Bronxville, followed by a reception at the local country club that had celebrated our commitment with the people who mattered most to us. The wedding had been everything we'd wanted, meaningful, affordable, and focused on beginning our life together, rather than impressing others with expensive displays. Our first home had been a modest 2-bedroom ranch house in Scarsdale that we'd purchased for $42. With a combination of our savings and a 30-year mortgage that had stretched our budget, but had given us the foundation for building equity and establishing ourselves in a community we'd wanted to be part of for the long term. The house had needed substantial work, updated electrical systems, new plumbing, modern appliances, and fresh paint throughout. But William's analytical skills and my determination to learn home improvement techniques had allowed us to transform it into a comfortable, welcoming space that had reflected our personalities and values. We'd spent our first 5 years of marriage working on the house during weekends and evenings, gradually modernizing each room while maintaining the original character that had attracted us to the property. William had handled all the financial, planning, and major repairs, while I'd focused on decorating, organizing, and creating the kind of efficient household management systems that had supported both of our demanding careers. During this period, my teaching career had continued to flourish in ways that had brought both personal satisfaction and increasing financial contribution to our household. I'd been promoted to assistant principal for curriculum and instruction, had been selected to lead a district-wide initiative for improving literacy instruction, and had received the State Education Department's Excellence in Teaching Award for my innovative approaches to helping struggling students develop advanced analytical skills. My salary had grown to $22,000 by my 10th year of teaching, and I'd continued my practice of saving aggressively while maximizing my contributions to the teacher's retirement system that would eventually provide a substantial pension. William's career at IBM had also progressed steadily, with regular promotions and salary increases that had reflected his expertise in corporate financial analysis and his reputation for reliability and accuracy. By 1975, William and I had felt financially secure enough to start trying for children, both of us excited about the prospect of becoming parents and raising a family in the comfortable home and stable community we'd worked so hard to establish. We'd had names picked out, had begun converting the spare bedroom into a nursery, and had started the kind of hopeful financial planning that parents do when they believe their dreams are about to come true. But pregnancy had proved more challenging than we'd anticipated. After 18 months of trying without success, we'd consulted fertility specialists who'd conducted extensive testing without finding any definitive medical explanation for our inability to conceive. We'd tried various treatments and interventions, each month bringing renewed hope followed by devastating disappointment when the results continued to be negative. The fertility treatments had been both emotionally and financially draining, costing thousands of dollars that hadn't been covered by our health insurance and requiring scheduling accommodations that had affected both our careers. But we'd been determined to exhaust every medical option before accepting that biological parenthood might not be part of our story. After 3 years of fertility treatments and 2 early miscarriages that had left us emotionally devastated, we'd finally made the difficult decision to focus our parental energy on other relationships and activities. The grief had been profound, not just for the children we'd lost, but for the family life we'd envisioned and the genetic legacy we'd never pass on. But even in our sadness, we'd found ways to channel our parental instincts into meaningful relationships with the young people in our lives. I'd poured even more energy and creativity into my teaching, developing special mentoring programs for students who needed extra academic and emotional support. William had begun volunteering with youth financial literacy programs at our church and the local community center, teaching basic budgeting and investment concepts to teenagers from families where financial education hadn't been a priority. When Jessica had finally been born in 1975, after we'd essentially given up hope of having biological children, she'd felt like a miracle that had transformed our understanding of family and our vision for the future. The pregnancy had been unexpected but completely welcome, and Jessica's arrival had filled our home with the kind of joy and purpose we'd been missing for years. From the moment Jessica had taken her first breath, she'd been the center of our universe in ways that had both delighted and occasionally concerned us. After years of wanting a child so desperately, we'd sometimes struggled to maintain appropriate boundaries and expectations, wanting to give Jessica every possible advantage while also helping her develop the character and work ethic that would serve her well throughout her life. Jessica had been a remarkably bright and curious baby, who'd reached every developmental milestone ahead of schedule, and had shown early signs of the intelligence and determination that would characterize her approach to everything she encountered. By age 2, she'd been speaking in complete sentences, solving complex puzzles, and demonstrating the kind of analytical thinking that had made us confident she would excel academically. "This child is going to accomplish amazing things," William had said one evening when 3-year-old Jessica had surprised us by reading simple books independently. "We need to make sure we're prepared to support whatever dreams she develops." That commitment to supporting Jessica's dreams had led us to begin setting aside substantial amounts of money for her future education, even when she was still in preschool. We'd opened a dedicated savings account that had received $200 per month. Throughout Jessica's childhood, money that had required us to live more frugally than our income would have otherwise allowed. But that had grown to nearly $25,000 by the time Jessica had been ready for college. We'd also invested heavily in Jessica's extracurricular activities, believing that exposure to music, sports, and academic enrichment programs would help her develop the well-rounded skills and interests that would serve her well in college admissions and beyond. Piano lessons, soccer leagues, summer academic camps, and dance classes had cost thousands of dollars annually, but we'd considered these expenses essential investments in Jessica's development. Jessica's academic excellence throughout elementary and middle school had confirmed our belief that she was capable of achieving at the highest levels, but it had also made us aware of the substantial financial commitments that would be required to provide her with the educational opportunities that would maximize her potential. Private tutoring for advanced mathematics, test preparation for standardized examinations, and application consulting for competitive summer programs had been expensive but necessary investments in Jessica's future. By the time Jessica had entered high school, we'd been spending approximately $8,000 per year on her educational enhancement, a significant portion of our household income that had required us to postpone some of our own goals, including the European vacation we'd been planning and the kitchen renovation that had been needed for years. But we'd made these sacrifices gladly, both of us convinced that investing in Jessica's education was the most meaningful way we could use our resources to ensure her success and happiness. Jessica had seemed genuinely grateful for our support, often expressing appreciation for the opportunities we were making possible, and promising that she would honor our investment through her academic achievements and future success. "Mom and Dad," she'd said during her high school graduation speech as valedictorian, "everything I've accomplished is because you believed in me and were willing to sacrifice for my dreams. I promise you that I'll spend my life making you proud and finding ways to give back the way you've given to me." The college years had represented our largest financial investment in Jessica's future. Even with her substantial merit scholarship to NYU, the remaining tuition, room and board, books, and living expenses had totaled nearly $25,000 per year. William and I had covered these costs through a combination of our college savings, current income, and careful budgeting that had required us to eliminate most discretionary spending for 4 consecutive years. We'd driven our cars longer than we'd planned, had postponed home improvements that had been needed, had canceled vacation plans, and had reduced our own retirement contributions to ensure that Jessica could graduate from college without student loan debt that might limit her post-graduation options. When Jessica had graduated summa cum laude with her MBA and had immediately been recruited by Meridian Marketing Group, William and I had felt an enormous sense of pride and relief. Our investment in her education had clearly paid off in terms of her professional opportunities, and her starting salary of $65,000 had seemed to validate our belief that educational excellence would translate into financial security. But even after Jessica had established herself professionally, our financial support had continued in ways that had seemed natural and appropriate at the time. When Jessica had needed professional wardrobe for her new job, we'd contributed $3,000 for clothing and accessories that would help her make a positive impression in the competitive Manhattan business environment. When Jessica had wanted to live in a prestigious Manhattan neighborhood that had been beyond her entry-level salary, we'd provided a $15,000 security deposit and first year's rent supplement that had allowed her to establish herself in a location that would support her professional networking and career advancement. "Mom and Dad," Jessica had said when we'd provided this assistance, "having your support gives me the confidence to make career decisions based on long-term strategy rather than just immediate financial pressure. I'll find ways to pay you back once I'm more established." The pattern of financial assistance had continued throughout Jessica's 20s as she'd built her career and eventually met Derek. Wedding expenses, house down payment assistance, and ongoing support during her extended maternity leave had totaled more than $150,000 over the years. Money we'd provided willingly because we'd believed in Jessica's character and had trusted that our generosity was creating stronger family bonds that would sustain us through our own aging process. Throughout our careers, William and I had maintained our commitment to aggressive saving and conservative investing that had allowed us to build substantial wealth despite the significant amounts we'd contributed to Jessica's support over the years. By the time we'd both retired in 2015, our combined assets had included our paid-off home worth $950,000, investment accounts totaling $850,000, and pension benefits that had provided secure monthly income for the rest of our lives. Our retirement had been everything we'd hoped it would be: comfortable, secure, and filled with the travel, hobbies, and volunteer activities we'd been planning for decades. We'd taken the European trip we'd postponed for years, had become active in community organizations, and had developed a rich social life with other retirees who shared our interests in cultural activities and lifelong learning. Most importantly, we'd maintained our close relationship with Jessica and her family, enjoying regular visits with Tyler and Brandon and feeling proud of the life Jessica and Derek had built together. The financial assistance we'd provided over the years had seemed to strengthen rather than strain our family relationships, and Jessica had often expressed gratitude for our ongoing support and involvement in her life. When William had suffered his stroke in early 2019, Jessica had been incredibly supportive, visiting the hospital daily and helping me navigate the complex medical decisions that had been required during his treatment. She'd taken time off work to accompany me to doctor appointments, had researched rehabilitation facilities and home care options, and had provided the emotional support that had helped me maintain hope during William's difficult recovery period. William's death 3 months later had been devastating. Not just the loss of my husband and best friend, but the sudden transformation from being part of a couple to being alone for the first time in my adult life. Everything about my daily routine had required adjustment, from cooking meals for one person to making financial decisions without William's input and perspective. Jessica had been patient and understanding during my adjustment period, visiting regularly to check on my well-being and helping me navigate the practical challenges of widowhood. She'd helped me understand my financial situation, had assisted with legal and insurance matters, and had been instrumental in helping me make decisions about my future living arrangements. "Mom," Jessica had said several months after William's funeral, "I know this transition has been incredibly difficult, but I want you to know that you're not alone. Derek and I are here to help with whatever you need, and we want to make sure you feel secure and supported as you figure out this next phase of your life." Her support had felt genuine and had given me confidence that the investment William and I had made in our relationship with Jessica would provide the family connection and security I'd need as I aged. The decision to sell our house and move to the cottage had seemed like the natural next step in deepening those family bonds while maintaining my independence. The first 3 years in the cottage had been genuinely wonderful from my perspective. I'd enjoyed being close to Tyler and Brandon, watching them grow into thoughtful, accomplished teenagers who'd seemed to appreciate having their grandmother nearby for homework help, cooking lessons, and the kind of intergenerational conversation that had enriched all our lives. I'd also maintained my own independent social life through book clubs, volunteer work with literacy programs, and regular activities with other women my age who'd become close friends. The cottage had provided the perfect balance of family connection and personal autonomy, and I'd assumed that Jessica and Derek had been equally satisfied with our arrangement. My financial situation during this period had been more secure than ever. The investment portfolio had grown to nearly $900,000 despite regular withdrawals for living expenses. My pension had provided stable monthly income, and the paid-off cottage arrangement had kept my housing costs minimal. I'd even been able to continue contributing to Tyler and Brandon's education funds while building additional savings that would provide a substantial inheritance for Jessica's family. But what I hadn't realized was that Jessica had been viewing my financial security not as evidence of successful planning that would benefit our entire family, but as an opportunity for more immediate access to resources she'd believed should already be under her control. Looking back now, I can see that there had been subtle changes in Jessica's behavior over the past year that should have warned me about her changing attitude toward my independence and autonomy. She'd begun making small comments about my health, my memory, and my ability to manage various tasks without assistance. Comments that had seemed like natural expressions of concern. But that had actually been part of a systematic campaign to document my supposed decline. "Mom, are you sure you're keeping track of your medications correctly?" she'd ask, despite the fact that I'd been managing my simple blood pressure medication without difficulty for years. "Did you remember to pay your property tax bill?" she'd inquire, even though I'd been handling my financial obligations responsibly for decades. "Maybe I should start helping you with your investment account monitoring," she'd suggested. "These financial matters can be so complicated, especially when you're dealing with them alone." At the time, these questions had seemed like evidence of Jessica's caring concern for my well-being, and I'd even welcomed some of her assistance with tasks that had become more challenging since William's death. I'd appreciated her attention and had interpreted her involvement as proof that our close family relationship was providing the mutual support that had made the cottage arrangement so successful. What I hadn't understood was that Jessica had been carefully documenting these interactions, creating a record that could later be used to support claims about my diminished capacity and need for protective supervision. She'd been building a case for guardianship that would give her legal control over my assets while making it appear that her intervention was motivated by medical necessity rather than financial opportunism. The conversation I'd overheard that Tuesday morning had revealed that Jessica's expressions of concern had actually been reconnaissance missions designed to identify vulnerabilities in my independence and to create justification for the institutional placement they'd been planning. The casual way she'd discussed having me declared incompetent, the references to prepared power of attorney documents, and the detailed knowledge of assisted living costs had made it clear that this betrayal had been in development for months, or possibly years. Standing in my cottage that morning, processing the magnitude of what I'd discovered, I'd realized that everything I'd believed about my relationship with Jessica had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of her character and motivations. The daughter I'd sacrificed for, invested in, and trusted with my most vulnerable moments had been systematically planning to steal my independence, my assets, and my dignity, while convincing herself and others that her actions were motivated by care rather than greed. But what Jessica hadn't anticipated was that her plan to have me declared incompetent had one fatal flaw. I was actually completely competent, possessed of all my faculties, and equipped with the analytical skills, professional experience, and personal determination that had served me well throughout my career in dealing with manipulative teenagers who'd thought they could outsmart the adults in their lives. The foundation Jessica was planning to destroy, my financial security, my intellectual capability, my social connections, and my legal rights, was actually going to become the platform from which I would launch a response that would teach her exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who's spent her entire life identifying deception and holding people accountable for their choices. The retired English teacher who'd spent 3 decades teaching critical thinking and personal responsibility was about to give Jessica and Derek the most expensive education they'd ever receive about the consequences of betraying someone who'd made the mistake of loving them unconditionally. Sometimes the people who think you're becoming a burden are actually revealing that they've become a burden on your right to live with dignity and respect. Jessica was about to discover that the woman she'd dismissed as a confused liability was actually someone with the intelligence, resources, and determination to ensure that justice was served in ways she'd never imagined possible. Standing in my cottage that morning, still processing the devastating conversation I'd overheard between Jessica and Derek, I couldn't help but remember how different things had been just 2 years ago, when we'd celebrated what I'd thought was the pinnacle of our family relationship, Tyler's acceptance to Princeton University, and the promise of continuing our family legacy of educational achievement that had been the source of our greatest pride and closest bonds. It was May 2021, and the cottage garden had been in full bloom with the heirloom roses I'd transplanted from my original Scarsdale home, their fragrance filling the warm spring air as I'd prepared for what had become our most cherished family tradition, the annual graduation celebration that honored academic achievement and strengthened the multi-generational bonds that I'd believed would sustain us through whatever challenges lay ahead. I'd spent weeks preparing for Tyler's high school graduation party, wanting everything to be perfect for this milestone that represented not just his personal accomplishment, but the culmination of 18 years of family investment in his education and character development. The cottage had never looked more beautiful, decorated with white and gold banners in Princeton's colors, while the main house had been transformed into an elegant celebration space that could accommodate the 50 family members, teachers, and friends who'd been invited to share in Tyler's triumph. The menu had featured Tyler's favorite dishes: herb-crusted salmon, my signature garlic-roasted potatoes, asparagus with lemon butter, and the chocolate bourbon cake that had been requested for every family celebration since Tyler's 8th birthday. I'd spent 3 days preparing these dishes with the kind of attention to detail that reflected how much this celebration meant to our entire family. "Grandma Margaret, this party is absolutely incredible," Tyler had said as he'd arrived in his cap and gown, looking handsome and mature in a way that had made me realize how quickly he'd grown from the little boy who used to help me tend the garden into the accomplished young man who was about to embark on his journey to one of the world's most prestigious universities. Tyler had looked radiant that evening, wearing his graduation honors with the kind of quiet confidence that suggested he understood the significance of his achievements without becoming arrogant about his advantages. At 18, he was tall and athletic like his father, but with Jessica's analytical intelligence and my own love of literature and intellectual discussion that had made our conversations increasingly meaningful as he'd matured. "Thank you for making this so special," Tyler had continued, embracing me with genuine affection. "You've been such an important part of everything I've accomplished. I don't know if I would have gotten into Princeton without all the support and encouragement you've given me over the years." His gratitude had felt completely authentic, and I'd been struck by the maturity and thoughtfulness he demonstrated in recognizing the contributions that others had made to his success. This was exactly the kind of character development that William and I had hoped would result from our investment in family relationships and educational values. Jessica had looked particularly beautiful that evening, wearing a sophisticated navy dress that complemented her blonde hair and blue eyes, and carrying herself with the kind of proud maternal confidence that suggested she understood her role in Tyler's achievements. At 46, she had matured into an elegant woman whose professional success and family responsibilities had given her a sense of purpose and accomplishment that had made me proud of the daughter I'd raised. "Mom, you've outdone yourself," Jessica had said as she'd surveyed the cottage and gardens that had been transformed into a celebration venue worthy of Tyler's accomplishments. "Everything looks absolutely perfect. Tyler is so lucky to have a grandmother who cares this much about his milestones." Derek had been equally appreciative, dressed in his best suit, and wearing the kind of relaxed, happy expression that suggested he was genuinely proud of his son and grateful for the family support that had made Tyler's success possible. At 51, Derek had achieved partnership in his law firm and had developed the kind of professional confidence that had made him comfortable in any social situation. "Margaret, this celebration is exactly what Tyler deserves," Derek had said, embracing me warmly. "You've been such an important influence in his life. I hope you know how much Jessica and I appreciate everything you've done to help him reach this point." The guest list had included Tyler's closest friends, his favorite teachers from Bronxville High School, and the extended family members who had been part of his support system throughout his academic journey. But the most meaningful attendees had been the family members whose presence had represented the multi-generational commitment to education that had been the foundation of Tyler's success. The evening's highlight had been the series of speeches that had celebrated not just Tyler's individual achievements, but the family values and educational priorities that had made his success possible. Jessica had spoken first, as Tyler's mother, acknowledging the role that extended family had played in creating the conditions for his academic excellence. "Tyler's acceptance to Princeton represents more than just his individual hard work," Jessica had said, her voice filled with emotion as she'd addressed the assembled guests. "It's the result of a family commitment to education that began with my parents' decision to prioritize learning and character development over material possessions. My mother, Margaret, has been Tyler's most devoted supporter, helping with homework, attending every school event, and providing the kind of intellectual stimulation that has shaped his love of learning." She'd continued, "Mom, your influence on Tyler goes far beyond academic support. You've taught him the importance of critical thinking, intellectual curiosity, and personal integrity. The values you instilled in me and that I've tried to pass on to Tyler are evident in the young man he's become." Derek had spoken next, focusing on Tyler's character and the family dynamics that had contributed to his emotional and social development alongside his academic achievements. "Tyler has been blessed to grow up in a family where multiple generations have been invested in his success," Derek had said. "His grandmother Margaret has provided stability, wisdom, and unconditional love that have given him the confidence to pursue ambitious goals. The relationship between Tyler and his grandmother has been one of the most beautiful aspects of watching him grow up. But it had been Tyler's own speech that had moved me to tears and had seemed to capture everything wonderful about our family relationships and shared values. I want to thank everyone who's here tonight," Tyler had begun, his voice strong and confident despite the emotion of the occasion. "But I especially want to thank my grandmother, who has been my mentor, my cheerleader, and my role model for what it means to live a life dedicated to learning and service." He'd paused, looking directly at me with the kind of mature gratitude that had demonstrated how well he understood the sacrifices that had been made for his benefit. "Grandma Margaret, you've taught me that education isn't just about getting good grades or getting into prestigious schools," he'd continued. "You've shown me that real education is about developing the ability to think critically, communicate effectively, and contribute meaningfully to your community. Everything I've learned about integrity, persistence, and intellectual honesty has come from watching how you've lived your life." Tyler had concluded his speech by announcing his intention to major in English literature with a focus on education policy, revealing his plan to eventually pursue a career in educational administration that would allow him to contribute to improving opportunities for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. I want to spend my life making education more accessible and effective for students who don't have the advantages I've had, he'd said. That commitment comes directly from my grandmother's example of using her talents and resources to help others succeed. As part of the graduation celebration, I'd presented Tyler with a substantial financial gift that represented both my pride in his achievements and my commitment to supporting his continued success at Princeton. The check for $25,000 had been intended to cover his first year's expenses beyond what Derek and Jessica could provide, ensuring that Tyler could focus on his studies without financial stress. "Grandma, this is incredibly generous," Tyler had said when I'd presented him with the gift in front of the assembled family. "I promise you that I'll use this support wisely, and that I'll find ways to honor your investment through my academic work and future service to others." But the financial gift had been accompanied by something even more meaningful: the announcement that I'd established a $100,000 education trust fund that would support Tyler's undergraduate and graduate education, with any remaining funds to be used for Brandon's college expenses when he was ready for university. "Tyler, this trust fund represents more than just money," I'd explained to the gathering. "It represents our family's commitment to education as the foundation for a meaningful life. Your grandfather William and I always believed that the best inheritance we could provide was the opportunity for excellent education, and I want to ensure that both you and Brandon have every opportunity to pursue your academic dreams." The establishment of the trust fund had been met with overwhelming gratitude from Jessica and Derek, who'd understood that this gift would remove financial pressure from Tyler's college years, while also providing security for Brandon's future educational needs. "Mom, this is beyond generous," Jessica had said, her voice filled with emotion. "You're giving Tyler and Brandon advantages that will shape their entire lives. This kind of educational support is the most meaningful gift you could possibly provide." Derek had been equally moved by the gesture, recognizing the financial sacrifice that the trust fund represented, and the family values that had motivated my decision to prioritize educational investment over other possible uses of my resources. "Margaret, this gift demonstrates everything that's best about our family," Derek had said. "Your commitment to the boys' education shows them what it means to invest in the future and to value intellectual development over material possessions." The months between Tyler's graduation and his departure for Princeton had been filled with preparation activities that had brought our family closer together, while creating memories that I'd treasured as evidence of our strong intergenerational bonds. Shopping trips for college supplies, visits to Princeton's campus for orientation programs, and long conversations about academic goals and life planning had provided opportunities for meaningful connection and mutual support. I'd accompanied Tyler and Jessica on several shopping expeditions for college necessities, enjoying the opportunity to contribute to his preparation while spending quality time with both Tyler and Jessica. These outings had felt like natural extensions of the family support that had characterized Tyler's entire upbringing, and they'd provided opportunities for the kind of three-generational bonding that had enriched all our lives. "Grandma, I love that you're so involved in helping me get ready for college," Tyler had said during one of these shopping trips. "Having your support makes me feel more confident about this transition. I know that whatever challenges I face at Princeton, I'll have family behind me who care about my success." Jessica had seemed to genuinely enjoy these shared activities, often commenting on how much she valued the opportunity to maintain close family relationships across generations and how important it was for Tyler to understand the family heritage of educational achievement that he was continuing. "Tyler is so fortunate to have such an involved grandmother," Jessica had said during one of our preparation sessions. "The relationship between you two is exactly what I hoped for when we decided to move you into the cottage. This kind of family support is what makes the difference between just attending college and really thriving academically and personally." During this period, I'd also spent considerable time helping Tyler with the intellectual preparation that would serve him well in Princeton's demanding academic environment. We'd read and discussed several books that had been recommended for incoming freshmen, had worked together on developing his writing skills for college-level work, and had engaged in the kind of sophisticated literary analysis that had prepared him for the intellectual rigor he would encounter. Your grandmother's influence on your critical thinking skills is already evident, Derek had observed after listening to one of our discussions about contemporary American literature. The analytical approach she's taught you will serve you well in college and beyond. Throughout this period, Brandon had also been thriving academically and personally in ways that had demonstrated the positive effects of our family's educational values and supportive relationships. At 16, Brandon was developing into a thoughtful, accomplished young man who shared his older brother's intellectual curiosity while pursuing his own interests in science and technology. Brandon had been accepted into Bronxville High School's Advanced Placement Program, was maintaining a 4.2 GPA, and had been selected for the school's prestigious science research program that would allow him to conduct independent research under faculty supervision during his junior and senior years. His academic achievements had been accompanied by success in tennis and debate team that had demonstrated his ability to excel in multiple areas. Grandma Margaret, I want to follow Tyler's example of academic excellence, Brandon had told me during one of our regular study sessions. Having you available to help with homework and discuss ideas has been such an advantage. I hope I can eventually get into a school as good as Princeton. I'd been equally proud of Brandon's development and had enjoyed watching him discover his own academic passions while benefiting from the family support that had contributed to Tyler's success. The two brothers had maintained a close relationship despite their different interests, and Tyler had taken seriously his role as a positive example for Brandon's own educational journey. Brandon is going to be just as successful as Tyler, Jessica had observed during one of our family dinners. Having an older brother at Princeton will motivate him to continue working hard, and having your ongoing support will give him the same advantages that helped Tyler succeed. The family dynamics during this golden period had felt healthy, supportive, and mutually beneficial in ways that had made me confident about our long-term relationships and shared values. Regular family dinners, weekend activities, and holiday celebrations had provided opportunities for meaningful connection while respecting everyone's individual interests and responsibilities. During this same period, my own life had been more fulfilling and socially rich than it had been since William's death. The cottage had provided the perfect base for maintaining an active lifestyle that had included volunteer work, social activities, and personal interests that had given meaning and purpose to my retirement years. I'd become actively involved with the Westchester Literacy Council, where I'd volunteered as a tutor for adult learners who were working to improve their reading and writing skills. This work had been incredibly rewarding, allowing me to use my teaching expertise to help people achieve their educational goals while staying connected to the profession that had defined my career. Mrs. Sullivan, you have such a gift for making complex ideas understandable, one of my adult students had told me after successfully completing his high school equivalency exam. Your encouragement and teaching methods made all the difference in my success. I'd also maintained an active social life through book clubs, bridge groups, and cultural activities with other women my age who'd become close friends. The Westchester County area had provided access to excellent museums, theater productions, and lecture series that had enriched my intellectual life while providing opportunities for social connection. My book club had been particularly meaningful, bringing together 12 women who shared my love of literature and intellectual discussion. Our monthly meetings had provided opportunities for sophisticated analysis of contemporary and classic works, and the friendships I'd developed had given me a strong support network of peers who understood the challenges and opportunities of aging. Margaret, your insights always add so much depth to our discussions, my friend Eleanor Hoffman had said after one particularly engaging meeting. Your teaching background gives you such valuable perspectives on how to analyze literature and lead meaningful conversations. Throughout this golden period, my financial situation had been more secure than ever, with my investment portfolio having grown to nearly $950,000 despite regular withdrawals for living expenses and substantial gifts to support Tyler's education. The combination of my teacher's pension, Social Security benefits, and investment income had provided more than enough money to maintain my comfortable lifestyle while continuing to contribute to my family's financial well-being. I'd worked with my financial advisor to establish a comprehensive estate plan that had balanced my desire to enjoy my resources during my lifetime with my commitment to providing substantial inheritances for Jessica's family. The plan had included the educational trust funds for Tyler and Brandon, specific bequests for charitable organizations I'd supported, and arrangements that would ensure Jessica and Derek would eventually inherit the majority of my assets. Mrs. Sullivan, your estate plan reflects excellent planning and generous family values, my attorney had said during one of our planning sessions. You've created arrangements that will provide security for your own future while ensuring that your family will benefit substantially from the wealth you and your husband built together. The estate planning process had given me satisfaction and peace of mind, knowing that I'd organized my affairs in ways that would honor William's memory while providing for the people and causes that mattered most to me. I'd felt confident that Jessica and Derek appreciated the financial security I was providing while respecting my autonomy in making decisions about my own resources. The family traditions we'd established during this period had become some of the most treasured aspects of my life in the cottage. Weekly family dinners, holiday celebrations, and special occasion gatherings had provided regular opportunities for meaningful connection while creating the kind of memories that I'd believed would sustain our relationships for years to come. Our Thanksgiving celebration in 2021 had been particularly special. Held at the main house with extended family members joining Jessica, Derek, Tyler, Brandon, and me, for a feast that had combined traditional dishes with newer additions that reflected our evolving family traditions. I'd been responsible for my signature sweet potato casserole and cranberry sauce, while Jessica had coordinated the overall menu and Derek had managed the turkey preparation that had been his specialty for years. I'm so grateful for this family. And for the traditions we've built together, Jessica had said during her Thanksgiving toast. Having Mom living so close has made it possible to maintain the kind of multi-generational connections that give meaning to all our celebrations. The boys are so fortunate to have such an involved grandmother, and Derek and I feel blessed to have such ongoing family support. Tyler had echoed these sentiments, speaking about how much he valued the family relationships that had supported his development and would continue to provide connection and guidance as he navigated college and young adulthood. Grandma Margaret, having you as such an active part of my life has shaped who I am in ways I'm only beginning to understand, Tyler had said. Your wisdom, your values, and your constant support have given me confidence to pursue ambitious goals, while staying grounded in what really matters. Christmas 2021 had been equally wonderful, celebrated in the cottage's living room with a beautiful tree that Tyler and Brandon had helped me select and decorate. The gift exchange had included meaningful presents that had reflected our understanding of each other's interests and needs, and the entire celebration had felt like evidence of the strong family bonds that had made my living arrangement so successful. This cottage is the perfect setting for our family celebrations, Derek had observed as we'd gathered around the tree for our traditional Christmas morning gift opening. Having you so close makes it possible to maintain traditions while respecting everyone's need for privacy and independence. The spring of 2022 had brought new reasons for family celebration and pride, as Tyler had completed his first year at Princeton with academic honors, and Brandon had been accepted into several competitive summer programs that would enhance his preparation for college applications. Both boys had been thriving in ways that had validated our family's educational investments and supportive relationships. Tyler's reports from Princeton had been consistently positive, with stories about challenging courses, inspiring professors, and meaningful friendships that had demonstrated his successful transition to college life. His academic performance had been excellent, and his involvement in extracurricular activities had shown that he was developing the kind of well-rounded college experience that would serve him well beyond graduation. Grandma, Princeton is everything. I hoped it would be, Tyler had said during one of our regular phone conversations. The intellectual environment is incredible, and I feel prepared for the academic challenges because of all the support and preparation you and the family provided. I'm already thinking about graduate school and how I can use my education to contribute to improving educational opportunities for others. Brandon's acceptance into the Johns Hopkins Summer Science Program had represented another family academic achievement that had brought us together to celebrate his success and plan for his continued development. The 3-week program would provide Brandon with advanced laboratory experience and exposure to cutting-edge research that would enhance his college applications and his understanding of potential career paths in science and technology. This summer program represents exactly the kind of opportunity we hoped Brandon would have, Jessica had said as we'd planned for his participation. Having your ongoing support for both boys' educational development has made it possible for them to pursue these kinds of enrichment experiences that will make such a difference in their futures. Throughout this entire golden period, I'd felt deeply satisfied with the life I'd built and the relationships that sustained me. The cottage arrangement had seemed to provide exactly the right balance of independence and family connection. My financial security had allowed me to be generous with my resources while maintaining my own comfort and my relationships with Tyler. And Brandon had given me a sense of purpose and joy that had made aging feel like a privilege rather than a burden. Jessica and Derek had seemed equally content with our arrangement, frequently expressing gratitude for my proximity and involvement in their lives while respecting my autonomy and independence. Their expressions of appreciation had felt genuine, and I'd had no reason to question their commitment to maintaining our mutually beneficial living situation. "Mom, this arrangement has worked out better than we ever could have hoped," Jessica had said during a conversation about renewing our cottage lease for another year. "You're close enough to be involved in the boys' lives, but you have complete independence and privacy. It's the perfect solution for everyone involved." Derek had been equally positive about our continued arrangement, often commenting on how much he valued having me nearby and how beneficial my presence had been for Tyler and Brandon's development. "Margaret, having you living here has enriched all our lives," Derek had said. "The boys have benefited enormously from having such an engaged grandmother, and Jessica and I have appreciated knowing that you're secure and happy while maintaining your independence." But what I hadn't understood was that beneath these expressions of satisfaction and gratitude, Jessica and Derek had begun to view my financial security and my ongoing independence as obstacles to their own long-term financial planning rather than as evidence of successful aging and family relationships. The very things that had made me feel most secure, my substantial assets, my physical health, my mental acuity, and my determination to maintain autonomy, had apparently become sources of frustration for Jessica and Derek, who had begun to see me as an impediment to accessing resources they'd believed should already be under their control. Looking back now, I can see that the golden era of our relationship had begun to end sometime in the late spring of 2022. Though the changes had been so subtle that I'd initially attributed them to normal fluctuations in family dynamics, rather than evidence of fundamental shifts in Jessica and Derek's attitudes toward me and my place in their lives. Jessica had begun making small comments about my health, my memory, and my ability to manage various tasks independently. Comments that had seemed like expressions of caring concern, but that had actually been part of a systematic campaign to document my supposed decline and create justification for increased supervision and control. The questions about my medication management, my financial record-keeping, and my social activities had initially seemed like natural expressions of filial concern, but they had gradually increased in frequency and intensity in ways that had made me slightly uncomfortable without fully understanding why. But even these subtle warning signs hadn't prepared me for the devastating revelation that the daughter I'd loved, supported, and trusted had been systematically planning to destroy my independence, while convincing herself and others that her actions were motivated by care rather than greed. Standing in my cottage that October morning, processing the conversation I'd overheard between Jessica and Derek, I'd finally understood that everything I'd believed about our family relationships had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Jessica's character and priorities. The golden era was over, but what Jessica didn't know was that ending, it would prove to be the biggest mistake she'd ever made in her life. Sometimes the people who seem most grateful for your generosity are actually calculating how to take advantage of your trust. Jessica was about to learn that the woman she'd dismissed as a confused burden was actually someone with the intelligence, resources, and determination to ensure that justice was served in ways she'd never anticipated. The foundation of our relationship had been built on love, sacrifice, and mutual respect, but it was about to become the platform from which I would launch a response that would teach Jessica and Derek exactly what happens when you betray someone who's spent her entire life teaching accountability and consequences to people who thought they were smarter than everyone else in the room. Standing in my cottage that October morning, still reeling from Jessica and Derek's casual discussion of having me declared incompetent and institutionalized so they could control my assets, I felt the last fragments of my old life crumbling away. But what I discovered when I decided to investigate the full scope of their betrayal would transform my shock and devastation into a cold, calculating determination that would change everything. After hearing Jessica mention that the power of attorney documents are already prepared, I realized I needed to understand exactly what they'd been planning behind my back. That afternoon, while Jessica and Derek were at work and the boys were at school, I made a decision that would expose the most sophisticated betrayal I'd ever encountered. Using the spare key I'd always had to the main house for emergencies, I entered Jessica and Derek's home office, a room I'd been in countless times for family discussions about finances, college planning, and household management. But this time, I was looking for evidence of the conspiracy they'd been developing against me. What I found in Derek's filing cabinet was more devastating than anything I could have imagined. A manila folder labeled Mrs. Estate Planning contained documents that revealed Jessica and Derek had been planning my destruction for more than 18 months, with a level of sophistication that demonstrated this wasn't impulsive greed, but carefully orchestrated theft. The first document was a forged power of attorney that claimed to grant Jessica comprehensive authority over all my financial and legal affairs. The signature looked remarkably like mine, suggesting they'd practiced forging my handwriting or had somehow obtained a sample to copy. The document was dated 6 months earlier and had been notarized by Derek's law firm colleague, making it appear completely legitimate. But the power of attorney was just the beginning. The folder also contained a detailed medical report signed by Dr. Harrison, my trusted primary care physician, claiming that I was suffering from progressive cognitive decline with impaired judgment and decision-making capacity. The report cited specific examples of confusion and memory lapses that had supposedly been observed during recent appointments. Appointments where I'd felt completely normal and had noticed no signs of concern from Dr. Harrison. Most shocking of all was a comprehensive financial analysis that detailed my exact net worth, including account numbers, investment holdings, and projected inheritance values. The document showed that Jessica and Derek had somehow gained access to my private financial information and had been monitoring my assets with the precision of professional financial planners. The folder contained brochures and detailed cost analyses for 3 different assisted living facilities in upstate New York, each specializing in memory care and providing varying levels of supervision for residents with cognitive impairments. The documents showed that Jessica had visited all 3 facilities, had obtained detailed pricing information, and had apparently selected Meadowbrook Manor in Albany as their preferred option for my placement. Meadowbrook Manor's brochure described a facility that looked pleasant enough in the photographs, but the cost structure revealed why Jessica had chosen it. At $4,500 per month for a standard room in their memory care unit, the facility would consume approximately $54,000 annually of my resources, a substantial but manageable expense that would allow Jessica and Derek to control the remaining $850,000 of my assets for their own purposes. But even more disturbing were the handwritten notes Jessica had made during her facility visits. Comments like minimal family visiting requirements, limited resident autonomy, and staff supportive of family financial management revealed that she'd been shopping for an institution that would keep me isolated and dependent while facilitating her control over my assets. Perhaps most shocking was a detailed spreadsheet that Derek had created, outlining their strategy for gaining control of my investments and maximizing returns for their benefit. The document showed that they planned to liquidate my conservative investment portfolio and reinvest the proceeds in higher-risk ventures that Derek had identified through his legal connections. Current returns too conservative for optimal growth, Derek had noted, can achieve 8 to 12% annually through private equity and real estate partnerships, generating additional $40 to $60K per year for family expenses and boys' education. The spreadsheet also detailed their plans for my cottage and its relationship to their property values. They'd calculated that converting the cottage into a rental unit could generate $2,400 per month in income, while my relocation to institutional care would eliminate the below-market rent I'd been paying while giving them full control of the property. But the most devastating discovery was a timeline that showed they'd been implementing this plan systematically over the past year. The document revealed that Dr. Harrison's cognitive assessment had been scheduled for the following week, that the power of attorney would be activated immediately after my supposed medical incapacitation, and that my transfer to Meadowbrook Manor was planned for before Thanksgiving. As I continued examining the documents, I discovered evidence that Jessica and Derek had been collaborating with Dr. Harrison to create a false medical record that would justify their claims about my cognitive decline. The folder contained copies of appointment notes that had been altered after my visits, changing routine discussions about blood pressure medication into concerning indicators of memory lapses and confusion. One particularly damning document was an email exchange between Jessica and Dr. Harrison discussing the best approaches for documenting cognitive decline in elderly patients who resist acknowledgement of their limitations. Dr. Harrison had provided detailed guidance on creating medical justification for guardianship proceedings, including specific language that would satisfy legal requirements while appearing to be based on legitimate clinical observations. Your mother's resistance to acknowledging her limitations is actually helpful for our documentation, Dr. Harrison had written to Jessica. This type of denial is consistent with early-stage dementia and will support the need for protective intervention. Reading these emails, I realized that my trusted physician had been systematically betraying my confidence and manipulating my medical records to facilitate Jessica and Derek's theft. Every question about my medication management, every inquiry about my social activities, every expression of concern about my independence had been part of a coordinated campaign to create justification for declaring me incompetent. The folder contained additional legal documents that revealed the sophistication of Jessica and Derek's planning. They'd prepared new wills and estate documents that would be implemented once they gained control of my affairs, redirecting my assets in ways that would maximize their immediate access while minimizing taxes and legal complications. A detailed timeline showed that they'd planned to have me declared incompetent within 2 weeks, transferred to Meadowbrook Manor before Christmas, and completely liquidated my current investment portfolio by the end of the year. The speed of their planned implementation suggested they'd been worried about maintaining their deception and had wanted to complete the theft before I could mount any resistance. But what they hadn't anticipated was that their careful documentation of their conspiracy would become the evidence I needed to destroy them completely. That afternoon, I photographed every document in Derek's file using my smartphone, creating a comprehensive record of their betrayal that would serve as evidence for the response I was already planning. But before taking any action, I needed to understand the full scope of their conspiracy and identify all the people who'd been involved in planning my destruction. My first call was to Steinberg Financial Advisors, where I spoke directly with my longtime advisor, Robert Steinberg, about any recent inquiries or attempted access to my accounts. "Mrs. Sullivan," Robert said after I'd explained my concerns, "your daughter did contact us about 6 weeks ago, claiming she had medical power of attorney and requesting detailed information about your portfolio. But our security protocols required us to verify that authorization with you directly, and when we couldn't reach you for confirmation, we refused to provide any information." Robert's revelation confirmed that Jessica had been attempting to access my accounts using fraudulent documents, but it also revealed that the security measures I'd established had prevented her from succeeding. More importantly, Robert's firm had documented Jessica's unauthorized access attempts, creating additional evidence of her criminal intent. "I'm very concerned about what you're describing," Robert continued. "This sounds like a sophisticated case of financial elder abuse. I think you should contact the police immediately and consider consulting with an attorney who specializes in these types of cases." My second call was to Dr. Harrison's office, where I requested copies of all my medical records from the past year. The nurse who handled my request seemed nervous and asked several times whether I was sure I wanted all my records, including consultation notes and correspondence. "Yes," I replied firmly. "I want every document in my file, including any communications Dr. Harrison has had with family members about my care." The nurse's obvious discomfort confirmed that there were documents in my file that I wasn't supposed to see, and her reluctance to provide complete records suggested that Dr. Harrison was aware of potential legal liability for his role in Jessica's conspiracy. My third call was to Patricia Reynolds, an elder law attorney whose name I'd found through online research focused on financial abuse cases. Patricia specialized in cases involving family members who targeted elderly relatives, and her website had described successful outcomes in situations remarkably similar to what I was experiencing. "Mrs. Sullivan," Patricia said after I'd explained my situation during our initial consultation, "what you're describing is one of the most sophisticated elder abuse conspiracies I've encountered. Your daughter and son-in-law haven't just planned to steal your money. They've created an entire framework for legally kidnapping you and systematically looting your assets while making it appear medically justified." Patricia explained that Jessica and Derek's plan would have been difficult to challenge once implemented, because the combination of medical documentation and legal authority would have made it nearly impossible for me to regain control of my affairs or prove that the guardianship was fraudulent. "The key to stopping this conspiracy is acting before they can implement their plan," Patricia continued. "Once you're declared incompetent and institutionalized, challenging their authority becomes exponentially more difficult. But since you've discovered their scheme before implementation, we can take steps to protect your assets and ensure they face appropriate consequences for their attempted crimes." Patricia outlined a comprehensive response strategy that would include criminal complaints, civil lawsuits, professional sanctions, and protective measures that would prevent Jessica and Derek from accessing my resources while ensuring they faced serious consequences for their betrayal. Working with Patricia, I spent the following week building an airtight case against Jessica, Derek, and Dr. Harrison that would expose every aspect of their conspiracy while protecting my assets and ensuring my continued independence. The evidence I'd gathered was overwhelming, but Patricia wanted to strengthen our position by documenting additional aspects of their fraud before filing formal complaints. Patricia arranged for an independent cognitive assessment by Dr. Sarah Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist with expertise in competency evaluations who could provide definitive medical evidence that I was mentally sound and capable of managing my own affairs. The evaluation was comprehensive, including psychological testing, cognitive assessments, and detailed interviews that clearly demonstrated my mental acuity and decision-making capacity. "Mrs. Sullivan, you scored in the 95th percentile for cognitive function in your age group," Dr. Chen reported after completing her evaluation. "You show no signs of dementia, cognitive impairment, or diminished capacity. Any medical professional claiming otherwise is either incompetent or acting fraudulently." Dr. Chen's report provided the medical evidence needed to refute Dr. Harrison's fraudulent assessment while establishing my competency to make decisions about my own care and finances. More importantly, her documentation would serve as expert testimony if legal proceedings became necessary. After gathering comprehensive evidence and establishing legal protections for my assets, I was ready to confront Jessica and Derek with the knowledge of their betrayal. But rather than simply exposing their conspiracy, I decided to let them reveal the full scope of their deception by pretending to cooperate with their plans. During our next family dinner, I casually mentioned that I'd been experiencing some confusion and memory problems that were concerning me. Jessica and Derek's immediate enthusiasm for this revelation was both pathetic and infuriating. "Mom, we've been noticing some changes too," Jessica said, barely containing her excitement. "Maybe it would be a good idea to have Dr. Harrison do a more comprehensive evaluation to understand what's happening and how we can best support you." Derek was equally eager to move forward with their plan, suggesting that we should also review my financial arrangements to ensure everything was properly organized in case I needed additional assistance with management and decision-making. "Margaret, it's probably wise to make sure all your legal documents are current and that appropriate people have authority to help if you need support," Derek said. "We want to make sure you're protected and that your wishes are respected if your health changes." Their transparent eagerness to implement their conspiracy was disgusting, but it also provided the final evidence I needed to demonstrate their criminal intent and complete betrayal of my trust. The following Monday, I met with Detective James Morrison of the Westchester County Sheriff's Department, where I provided comprehensive evidence of Jessica and Derek's conspiracy and requested a full criminal investigation. Detective Morrison specialized in financial crimes against elderly victims, and he immediately recognized the sophistication and seriousness of the attempted theft. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is one of the most elaborate elder abuse cases I've seen," Detective Morrison said after reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. "Your daughter and son-in-law haven't just planned to steal your money. They've created a criminal conspiracy involving medical fraud, document forgery, and planned false imprisonment." Detective Morrison explained that the case involved multiple felonies, including elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and attempted kidnapping. The involvement of Dr. Harrison added medical fraud charges, while Derek's use of his legal credentials to facilitate the scheme would result in professional sanctions and potential disbarment. "We'll need to move quickly to prevent them from implementing their plan," Detective Morrison continued. "Once we file charges, we'll also obtain restraining orders that will prevent them from accessing your property or contacting you directly." Police investigation moved forward rapidly, with search warrants executed at Jessica and Derek's home, Dr. Harrison's office, and Derek's law firm. The evidence gathered during these searches confirmed everything I'd discovered and revealed additional aspects of their conspiracy that were even more damning than I'd realized. Jessica was arrested at her workplace 3 days later on charges of elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft. The arrest had been coordinated to ensure maximum professional embarrassment, with her colleagues witnessing her removal in handcuffs while local news cameras captured footage that would later be broadcast throughout the region. Derek was arrested the same afternoon at his law firm, where partners had been informed of the charges and had immediately suspended him pending resolution of the criminal case. His arrest had been particularly humiliating because his colleagues had learned that he'd used his legal expertise to facilitate crimes against an elderly family member who'd trusted him completely. Dr. Harrison was arrested at his medical practice, where investigators had seized patient records and billing documents that revealed a pattern of fraudulent medical assessments designed to facilitate financial abuse by family members. His arrest had triggered investigations by medical licensing boards and Medicare fraud investigators who'd identified multiple other suspicious cases. While the criminal cases were proceeding, Patricia and I pursued comprehensive civil litigation designed to recover damages and ensure that Jessica and Derek faced financial consequences proportional to their attempted theft. The civil lawsuit sought not just recovery of any assets they'd managed to access, but punitive damages that would prevent them from benefiting from their conspiracy, even if they avoided conviction on criminal charges. The lawsuit revealed that Jessica and Derek had already begun implementing aspects of their plan, including attempts to access my investment accounts, inquiries about liquidating my assets, and preliminary arrangements with Meadowbrook Manor for my admission. These actions provided additional evidence of their criminal intent while establishing grounds for substantial damage awards. But the most satisfying aspect of the civil case was the discovery process, which allowed Patricia to subpoena financial records that revealed Jessica and Derek had been living beyond their means for years while planning to use my assets to fund their lifestyle and pay their debts. Mrs. Sullivan, your daughter and son-in-law have been essentially bankrupt for the past 2 years, Patricia explained after reviewing their financial records. They've been using credit cards and loans to maintain their lifestyle while counting on gaining control of your assets to resolve their financial problems. Word of Jessica and Derek's arrests spread quickly throughout our Westchester County community, where their reputation as a successful, respectable family was destroyed by revelations about their attempted elder abuse. Local newspapers covered the story extensively, describing the case as one of the most shocking examples of family betrayal in recent memory. The boys' schools, Jessica's employer, Derek's law firm, and our neighbors all learned about the conspiracy through media coverage that detailed every aspect of their planned theft. The social consequences were immediate and devastating, with former friends and colleagues expressing shock and disgust at their willingness to betray an elderly family member who'd supported them for decades. I can't believe Jessica and Derek would do something like this to you, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson told me after learning about the arrests. You've been such a wonderful grandmother to those boys and such a generous supporter of their family. This kind of betrayal is just unthinkable. But the most heartbreaking aspect of the community response was watching Tyler and Brandon learn about their parents' betrayal and struggle to understand how the people they'd trusted most had been planning something so cruel and selfish. Tyler's response to learning about his parents' conspiracy was both mature and heartbreaking. At 19, he was old enough to understand the legal and moral implications of what Jessica and Derek had planned, and his disgust with their behavior was evident in his decision to maintain contact with me despite his parents' attempts to isolate him from the family scandal. Grandma Margaret, I'm so sorry about what my parents tried to do to you, Tyler said during our first phone conversation after the arrests. I had no idea they were planning anything like this. What they did was wrong, and I want you to know that I don't support their actions in any way. Tyler's decision to continue our relationship despite his parents' betrayal meant everything to me, providing evidence that our bond had been based on genuine affection rather than financial obligation. His courage in rejecting his parents' behavior also demonstrated the character development that had resulted from our years of close relationship. Brandon's response was more complicated, as he was still a minor living in Jessica and Derek's home and dependent on them for support. But even at 17, he understood enough about their conspiracy to express shame and disappointment in their behavior. Grandma, I don't understand how Mom and Dad could plan something like this, Brandon said during one of our supervised phone conversations. You've been so good to our family. What they were planning was horrible and wrong. The criminal cases proceeded quickly, with overwhelming evidence making it impossible for Jessica, Derek, or Dr. Harrison to mount effective defenses. Rather than face lengthy prison sentences after jury trials, all 3 defendants accepted plea agreements that required substantial prison time, professional sanctions, and comprehensive restitution. Jessica was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, and was required to pay $150,000 in restitution plus court costs. Her criminal conviction also resulted in permanent exclusion from working in any profession involving access to vulnerable populations. Derek received a 30-month prison sentence due to his leadership role in the conspiracy and his abuse of his legal credentials to facilitate the scheme. He was also disbarred permanently, ensuring he could never practice law again, and was required to pay $200,000 in restitution that represented the estimated value of the assets he'd planned to steal. Dr. Harrison received the harshest sentence, 42 months in federal prison, because his medical fraud had violated the trust of multiple patients and had represented a systematic pattern of abuse rather than a single incident. His medical license was permanently revoked, and he was required to pay $300,000 in restitution to his victims. The civil lawsuit was settled for $850,000, representing not just recovery of potential stolen assets, but substantial punitive damages. That would ensure Jessica and Derek spent years rebuilding their financial lives. The settlement also included permanent restraining orders prohibiting any direct or indirect contact with me. But beyond the financial recovery, the civil case had exposed the full scope of Jessica and Derek's financial irresponsibility and had revealed that their entire lifestyle had been built on borrowed money and unrealistic expectations of inheriting my assets. The forced liquidation of their Westchester home, luxury vehicles, and personal belongings had been deeply satisfying evidence that their greed had ultimately destroyed everything they'd worked to build. 6 months after discovering Jessica and Derek's conspiracy, I made the decision that would complete my transformation from victim to victor. I sold the cottage, liquidated my remaining ties to Westchester County, and moved to Sarasota, Florida, where I'd purchased a beautiful condominium in an active, adult community that provided the social connections and cultural opportunities I'd been seeking. The decision to relocate had been both practical and symbolic. I'd wanted to distance myself physically from the scene of Jessica's betrayal, while creating a new environment where I could build relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. Sarasota had provided the perfect setting. For this fresh start, with year-round sunshine, excellent cultural amenities, and a community of active retirees who appreciated my intelligence and independence. "Margaret, you've made such a wise decision," my new neighbor Eleanor Martinez told me during one of our evening walks along Sarasota Bay. "You seem so much happier and more relaxed than when you first moved here. Starting over at 72 takes real courage, but you've created exactly the kind of life that honors your strength and independence." My new will, drafted by my Florida attorney, reflected my changed priorities and relationships. Tyler and Brandon would still receive substantial educational support and eventual inheritances, but the bulk of my estate would go to literacy organizations and educational charities that shared my values about the transformative power of learning and intellectual development. 2 years after her conviction, Jessica sent me a letter from prison, the first communication I'd received from her since her arrest. Reading it provided a final sense of closure to the most difficult period of my life, while confirming that my response to her betrayal had achieved exactly the consequences she'd deserved. "Mom," Jessica wrote, "I know you'll probably never read this letter, and I understand why you wouldn't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you that I'm sorry for what Derek and I plan to do to you. I can't explain how I became someone who could betray the person who'd given me everything, but I want you to know that losing you has been the worst consequence of my actions." She continued, "The prison time, the financial ruin, the destroyed reputation. None of that compares to knowing that I threw away the most important relationship in my life for money I didn't even need. I hope you're living well and that you found peace despite what I put you through. You deserved so much better from me, and I'm sorry I wasn't worthy of the love and trust you gave me." I read the letter once and then put it away without responding. Jessica's remorse might have been genuine, but it changed nothing about the consequences she'd earned through her betrayal. Some violations of trust are so complete that forgiveness becomes irrelevant compared to the importance of protecting yourself from future harm. 3 years after the discovery that had nearly cost me everything, I was thriving in ways I'd never expected. My Sarasota condominium had been beautifully decorated according to my own preferences rather than Jessica's suggestions. My social life had expanded to include new friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide financially. I'd become actively involved with the Sarasota Literacy Council, where I volunteered as a tutor and program coordinator, using my teaching expertise to help adult learners achieve their educational goals. The work had been incredibly fulfilling, providing purpose and meaning that had enriched my retirement years while contributing to my community. Mrs. Sullivan, you have such a gift for helping people believe in their own potential. One of my adult students told me after successfully completing her college entrance exams. Your encouragement and teaching methods have changed my life in ways I never thought possible. I'd also developed close friendships with other residents of my community, who'd become sources of mutual support and companionship. Bridge clubs, book groups, cultural outings, and volunteer activities had provided opportunities for meaningful social connections with people who appreciated intellectual conversation and shared interests. The most meaningful aspect of my new life had been maintaining my relationship with Tyler, who'd graduated from Princeton with highest honors and had been accepted to Harvard Law School with full financial support from the educational trust I'd established for him. His academic success had validated our years of investment in his education, while demonstrating that he'd developed the character and values that would serve him well throughout his life. Grandma Margaret, I want you to know how much our relationship has meant to me, Tyler said during one of his visits to Sarasota. What my parents did was unforgivable, but your response showed me what real strength and dignity look like. You've been my most important role model for integrity and resilience. Tyler's decision to pursue law school had been motivated partly by his desire to specialize in elder law and financial abuse prevention, using his education to protect other elderly people from the kind of betrayal I'd experienced. His career choice had represented a meaningful way to honor our relationship while contributing to systemic change that would benefit vulnerable populations. Looking back on the 3 years since I'd discovered Jessica's conspiracy, I realized that her attempted betrayal had actually been one of the most empowering experiences of my life. Fighting back successfully had given me confidence in my own capabilities, while demonstrating that age doesn't mean helplessness when you have the intelligence, resources, and determination to protect yourself. Eleanor, your story has inspired everyone in our community, my friend Patricia Williams told me during one of our book club meetings. You've shown that it's never too late to fight for your dignity, and that people who underestimate elderly women are sometimes in for a very unpleasant surprise. She was right about that. The 72-year-old woman Jessica had dismissed as a confused burden had turned out to be someone with the intelligence, resources, and determination to destroy her daughter's life as completely as Jessica had tried to destroy mine. Standing on my balcony overlooking Sarasota Bay, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. I'd fought for my dignity, my independence, and my right to live on my own terms, and I'd won completely. Jessica had learned too late that planning to steal from someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with manipulative, entitled people was the biggest mistake she'd ever made. She'd discovered that the elderly woman she'd tried to exploit was actually someone with the knowledge, resources, and determination to ensure that justice was served in ways she'd never anticipated. If someone in your life is treating you like you're disposable, remember my story. Remember that respect isn't optional, that trust once broken can never be rebuilt, and that people who underestimate you based on your age or circumstances might be making the most expensive mistake of their lives. You're never too old, never too weak, never too powerless to fight for what's rightfully yours. Sometimes the best thing that can happen is when someone pushes you far enough that you finally decide to push back with everything you have. What's your story? Have you ever had to fight back against someone who thought you were helpless? Share it in the comments below, And remember to like and subscribe for more stories about turning your worst betrayal into your greatest victory. Because sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up teaching you exactly how strong you really are. And sometimes that strength is enough to ensure they never underestimate anyone like you ever again. The conspiracy was supposed to be the end of my independence. Instead, it became the beginning of the most empowering chapter of my life. Jessica thought she was stealing my dignity, but what she actually did was help me discover that I was much more powerful than either of us had ever imagined. That's a lesson she'll have plenty of time to think about for the rest of her life, and for the rest of her existence. Every time she considers taking advantage of someone she thinks is vulnerable, she'll remember the 72-year-old teacher who taught her that some people fight back harder than you ever expected. Justice served. Lesson learned. Power reclaimed. Sometimes the best revenge is simply showing people exactly who they were foolish enough to cross. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.